Welcome to this week's Therapeutic Tuesday. And for this week's mini session, we are exploring a bit more a theme that we've touched on elsewhere in these Tuesday episodes, which is that your body knows how much it should be doing. One of the real challenges on the recovery journey can be knowing how much we should and shouldn't be doing. And we often have so many external pressures, ideas, demands, and learning to really trust and listen to our body is incredibly important. And that's really where I'm going in this mini session with Louise. Just a warning, there were some technical issues. The quality of the video from Louise's side isn't great, so apologies for that. But I felt that the content of the session justified still releasing it, even though technically the production value is not great on the video. So here is Louise's mini session and us exploring your body knows how much you should be doing. Is it 9:15 in the evening there?
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. So I hope my brain's still working. It might not be.
Well, it's Monday morning here, so my brain might not have woken up yet. So between the two of us, hopefully we'll get somewhere. So look, this is a bit of an experiment. I've filmed a few of these kind of mini sessions so far. And, it's kind of a bit of a halfway between more than just a kind of very simple kind of ask me a question, I'll give you an answer. But it's not obviously a full kind of dive into kind of doing a kind of session. So we'll see if we can get somewhere which is useful and helpful for you. Do you want to just give me a little bit more context in terms of I know you had a few questions, but I think they kind of all seem quite related in a sense in terms of the stage of kind of where you find yourself. But you just want to give me a bit more context just in terms of where you are at this point and what I might be able to help with.
Yeah, so I was diagnosed a year ago and I've had various times where I've been off work completely, but I have been managing to still work part-time. And recently it's been either one day a week or sometimes a little bit more. And I guess I am just wondering, should I be thinking about taking time completely off work, or should I just try and keep sticking with it for as long as possible? Because there are obviously good things about it as well as hard things. So there's that. And then there's also, I guess for me, in a way, the hardest thing at the moment, and it's been the hardest thing all along, is just the shift from being a really active outdoors person to being a sick person who can't do very much compared to previously. And I guess just coping with that change and with the uncertainty of not really knowing how long this is going to persist for, and just the question of, will I ever get back to being as active as I was? Maybe not, but even if I got closer to there compared to where I am now, I'd be happy with that.
Sure.
So yeah, there's that issue. And then there's another one, which I guess is more related to the work, which is what are the arguments for doing a more radical change, like taking time off and going away for a while, or moving to a warmer climate, or doing something more radical like that? Or is it better to stay in your own community and with the friends and family that you have around you? Like would there be more risk in doing something radical, I guess?
Sure. A few questions for you. What kind of work do you do at the moment?
Well, it's complicated in that I have been doing 2 part-time jobs. So my main one is as a university researcher in public health. So I was doing that, and then I also picked up this public radio job, which is kind of a change and a shift in a different direction. And I actually did make a decision recently to take 6 months off from the university job. So that'll be starting from September. So I will be cutting down and choosing one of them for now.
Sure.
Yeah.
Do you feel like in terms of where you were in your recovery process, you say it's kind of all coming up for a year or so since you first kind of got diagnosed. But I remember reading your notes that there's been kind of some vulnerabilities for a number of years kind of previously.
Yeah.
Do you feel like you're at a plateau kind of so kind of just stuck at the same level? Do you feel like you're gradually getting worse or that you're gradually improving? What's your sense of the trajectory that you're on at the moment?
I feel quite recently, just in the last 2 or 3 weeks, that I've been improving again. Whereas before that, for about 3 months, I was in quite a low. So I basically had a big crash after doing too much prior to that. So I did feel like I was in a plateau and I wasn't making much progress. And then I made a few decisions to get help from a few different people, a coach, a naturopath, and a counsellor. And so I've basically been working with the 3 of them recently, and
Right.
the counsellor was prior to that as well. And I feel now like I have turned a bit of a corner, or at least got off the plateau slightly.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the models that I use kind of at this stage is the first thing is to make sure that you're at least stable in terms of where you are. So if you're in a kind of picture of lots of kind of boom and bust where you're kind of better than you're crashed, then you're a bit better than you're crashed, then that's obviously really unhelpful in terms of both supporting physical recovery, but it also causes a lot of stress on the nervous system, which then exacerbates the whole picture.
Mm-hmm.
It's then, can we get, and if someone's on a gradual decline, can we at least get a kind of solid kind of baseline of foundation? It sounds like you kind of have that. It sounds like it's a little precarious given that there was a crash that you're kind of coming out of. And there's the signs of a little bit of progress. The next thing from my point of view is when there's a little bit of progress, how do we protect the progress that's happening? Because people's normal instinct is, oh, great, I'm doing better. How can I do more better more quickly? And then the result of that is normally that you kind of go up and it goes up too fast and it comes down again. So it's how do you protect the progress, and then it's how do you accelerate that progress. And I'm slightly making some assumptions here without obviously knowing the kind of deeper picture in terms of what's happening. But it sounds like part of the progress that's been happening has been down to adjusting your life a certain amount. And I think that's probably why there's bigger questions around, well, do I then need to adjust my life even more radically? If I've adjusted my life a bit and I can see some positive, does it then mean I have to make massive change to see kind of massive change in a sense?
Mm-hmm.
The way that I would look at it is, and I think you alluded to this anyway, that yes, sometimes people need to make dramatic changes. And equally, sometimes dramatic changes can come with their own set of stresses and problems that come with that. Like, for example, people think, well, being in a calmer environment is helping me be in a healing state. Therefore, I need to be in the most calm environment possible. Therefore, I'm going to go and live in a mountain in the middle of nowhere where there's absolutely no noise and no stimulation. And actually, that can be the most stressful environment to put oneself in sometimes, particularly if there's any kind of underlying trauma or anything like that, because you've got no distractions and the whole thing then kind of gets in your face in a sense. I think the balance that really I think it sounds like you're looking for is that you are in enough, your body is able to be in enough of a healing state enough of the time. Does that kind of make sense? So it's not that you need to be in a healing state all the time where you have no stresses or no demands or no stimulation. But if your body, let's say there's 100 units of energy that is your body's potential to create in a day. And let's say at the moment it's creating, I'm just picking arbitrary numbers, but let's say it's creating 50 units of energy a day. And let's say your activity, when you were at 100 units of energy production, you were trying to spend 110 or 120. And over time, that causes a state of kind of stress and kind of burnout in the system. And then let's say now your body's creating 50 units, but perhaps you're trying to do 51 or 52 or 55 units, and some days you're doing 40 or 45. But if there's any kind of achiever or helper or kind of pushing patterns, the tendency is always to be at the edge of where we are. And in those kind of pictures, people will say to me, well, I've halved my activity. Like, come on, like, it's not like I'm an achiever anymore because I'm doing half of what I was doing before. But the measure of the achiever is not how much activity you're doing. It's how much you're doing versus how much energy production's being created. It's a little bit like, someone that's got terrible kind of spending habits, and, they were spending kind of, I don't know, £100,000 a month or something, and they've now cut down to £50,000 a month, and they're like, I've halved my expenditure. It's like, it's completely irrelevant if they're only earning £2,000 a month. So kind of extreme example, but I think you kind of get the point. So the question is not to get your energy expenditure to zero. It's to get it enough in balance with the energy production which is there at the moment, because you need a surplus between your energy production and your energy expenditure. So that spare energy can be used for healing, because it takes energy for the body to heal and repair, and to build up energy reserves and build up resilience. Because one of the things people find is that energy starts to come back, their capacity gets a little bit more, you do a little bit more, and then as soon as you cross a line, like, the whole system kind of crashes again because there's nothing in reserve. So part of that surplus energy is then building up energy reserves, which then means that you have the resilience when you start to go a little bit more enthusiastically in terms of bouncing the boundaries. So I haven't really answered your specific question yet. I've kind of given a kind of general kind of frame around it. But I think to come back to your experience, then my question really becomes, as you kind of hear that, where do you think at the moment your energy expenditure or your kind of activity level feels versus the actual energy that you've got available? Does it feel like that's in balance or sync, or does it feel like it isn't at the moment?
So does it feel like it's in balance or not in balance?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, recently when I've been working with the coach and using a pedometer to measure my steps and to have a goal of not going above a certain number of steps, that felt like then it was getting more in balance. But I know that generally I do have the tendency to always do a bit more, want to do as much as possible. And so I feel like, recently it has also been quite out of balance, and previously in the winter time, our winter, which we're still in, it has been quite out of whack, and I was having quite massive fatigue and pain escalation again.
Okay. How do you measure the progress that you're making? What I mean by that is, how do you know that you've had a good day, or how do you know that you've had a bad day?
Well, recently in this crash, it was more of a period of 2 months, or maybe even more, of being in a pretty consistent crash. So it wasn't so much good days and bad days. It was more a bad couple of months. Yeah. So I guess it's about the level of fatigue, and can I leave the property or not? Do I leave the couch for some parts of the day or not? And can I keep working? How much time off am I taking? That kind of thing.
Yeah. So you're doing a fairly classic achiever measurement here. So you're measuring your recovery by how much you can do in a day or a week, right? So you're looking back on the day or the week or the month and going, well, I managed to do more work this week than last week, therefore this week was a week of progress. And that's completely a natural thing to do. Like I say it's a mistake. I don't mean that in a judgmental way. It's just that's what we tend to do. The problem is that if you're measuring your recovery by how much you do, you're always tempted to try and do a bit more, because then you have got a stronger belief that day that I'm getting better. And, of course, there's an enormous emotional investment in wanting to recover. And I haven't forgotten your original question about where you could get to in terms of activity kind of on the other side. But it's a kind of a natural tendency to go, well, this was a good day or this was a good week because I was able to do more. The problem is that when you measure it that way, as I said, you're always tempted to push, and you're always tempted to kind of do that a little bit extra. But also, I would say that the measure of recovery is not how much you do, it's how much healing actually happens in your body. And if you're at the edge of your capacity, all of your energy is being used to just survive and get through that day or that week or that month. Sometimes I would offer that the greatest measure of recovery is how well you're integrating the lessons and the principles which are actually allowing healing to happen and how much healing is happening. Which means that a week where you may have said no to certain things or rested longer or rested deeper or been more in tune with your body and used your body's wealth of information and feedback as a kind of source of information of what you should and shouldn't be doing, then actually you might have done 20% less that week, but actually you've taken a significant step along the recovery path that you wouldn't otherwise have taken.
Yeah.
How does that kind of land with you?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
I think that there's another piece of the jigsaw I want to touch on here. We're obviously focusing quite heavily around the pacing element and around activity level, which obviously is important. And it sounds like for where you are at the moment, it is an important piece of the jigsaw. I think we always have to remember, and it sounds like you're working with a naturopath, and this is kind of, we haven't got the time to dive deep into kind of all of those pieces in terms of where you are, and that's not so my personal area of speciality anyway. But I always would say we always want to understand physically why someone's body has the limitations that it has at this point in time. So getting to the bottom of that, be that mitochondrial function, be it digestive function, be it loads on the immune system, be it hormone function, whatever the bodily systems are in a particular given case, that is also part of the picture. Like, is it possible through really careful pacing and listening to the body and being in the body's kind of rhythm and flow to go from, for example, where you are to full recovery? Yes. Does it happen? Yes. Is it the fastest path to recovery? No, normally, because it means the body's having to do everything by itself without any additional support. So getting to the bottom, and that kind of back to what I was saying of, we want to stabilize where someone is, we want to start to make progress, we want to protect the progress, we want to accelerate the progress. But one of the key parts of that is what is happening physically and addressing that, because that is a massive support to the healing process. But there's nothing that we do in terms of supplements or anything else that magically fixes the body. That supports the body to do its own healing, which is why the body has to be in a healing state to be able to do that. So yeah, I also just wanted to make sure, it sounds like you're already aware of that because you're doing work on that side, but that's also an important piece of it.
Yeah.
The other piece then that comes to mind here is you had a question around where is it possible to get to in terms of recovery? And the honest answer to that question is, for you personally and everyone else personally, I don't know and no one else knows. What we find out is how far you get down that path. What I will say is that the majority of people that figure out what's wrong, use the best of what's understood now to work with that, get the body in a calm healing state, pace and listen to the body, are able to get down a long way down that recovery path. And for many people, that's to be much healthier than they were before. For others, there are still things that have to be considered and things that have to be taken care of. We don't know, and nobody knows everything that there is to know, because medicine's evolving every minute of every day. But is it a reasonable expectation that you can get back to a level of normal, healthy functioning? Absolutely. For some people, their expectation of normal was the reason why they got sick in the first place. So I don't, that's a whole other kind of topic. Just to come back to the pacing, where do you feel you are, just as you've been perhaps reflecting a bit more as I've been kind of talking at you for the last few minutes, where do you feel you are in terms of what you're doing? So I was saying about measuring how you're doing by actually healing happening versus activity. You've reduced obviously quite a lot in terms of what you're doing. And I also made the point about it's not necessarily a radical shift of dropping everything. It's about getting enough of a shift that ultimately healing is happening. As you're reflecting on that, what comes to mind?
Well, I feel like I have dramatically reduced my activity, and I'm learning about pacing, and I know that I find it hard. And so it is something that I'm really working on, and working on saying no to more things, um, and just trying to really plan my week and manage my time better. So I'm definitely really aware of it, but I also feel almost a lack of trust, because I know that I have the boom bust tendency, like the push crash. Um, and so I guess I feel like in terms of activity, I'm almost prone to doing not enough now, because I'm scared that if I do anything, then I'll do too much. Like I don't quite trust myself that I won't be able to do too much, or yeah, I feel like I will do too much. So then I err on the side of doing very little again, and then I know that's not good for me, and I can feel I'm much more deconditioned now than what I used to be. So yeah, it's just that step of having that confidence to do it in small stages, I guess, is what I think I need to be doing.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it? Because it almost becomes like a pendulum, which kind of is up here, and then you kind of swing to the other extreme to go, well, if I was doing chronically too much, I now want to, I'm almost becomes an anxiety of activity. And that's where working with calming the nervous system, getting the body into a healing state, working through those kind of stress and anxiety patterns can be really important. Ultimately, we want you mentioned counting steps, which I think can be a helpful tool as part of pacing. But ultimately, we don't want the measure of how much you do to be your push and achiever pattern, or a kind of pre-scripted activity plan that you say, I have to do this on a certain day, or a kind of, this is how many steps I have to be doing. The ultimate destination is that you listen to your body and you decipher all the information that's there, and that becomes the information of knowing how much you can and can't do. The challenge is that information can be quite confusing to decipher sometimes, and it changes at different stages of the recovery process. So there's quite a lot of, it's almost like learning a new language, in a sense, of learning how to be in tune with and how to listen to and how to decipher what's there. Doing that step effectively is one of the most important preventers of relapse down the line. Because if someone recovers through, great naturopathy or nutritional therapy kind of work that fixes things around, helps fix things out of balance in the body, or by kind of calms the nervous system, gets in a healing state that goes off like a rocket, if you haven't learned to listen to your body and honor those signals, then you end up recreating the same situation a year down the line, or 5 years down the line, or 10 years down the line. When I see repetitive relapse patterns, that's one of the factors that's often behind that. So really paying attention to this stage, despite the fact that it's quite frustrating, it's quite tedious, it's quite boring, it's quite lonely, is important. And measures like measuring steps are helpful. So it's not a negation of that. It's just making the point that that's all helpful information. The most important information is learning to listen to your body.
Yeah, which I guess takes time, doesn't it? It's a process of learning.
It's a bit like going to a foreign language class for the first time. None of it makes sense initially, and it takes some time to figure it out.
Yeah.
Where does that leave you, just as we kind of start to kind of come towards the end of the time we've got, where does that leave you practically in terms of, like, when you reflect on kind of what we're talking about, what comes to mind in terms of action points or things that you feel would be helpful for us to put into action?
I guess reframing some of the ways that I'm thinking about how I'm progressing or not progressing. So trying to shift away from looking at activity as the measure, and looking more at recovery and getting in that healing state and doing things that I know are good towards that. That's probably one major one.
Yeah, I think that sounds good. And I think it's also, in a sense, it's the really, and I think it's one that's not possible to answer in the time we have here, because you're going to need to take some time to think about it. But it's really figuring out kind of, and sometimes it just takes a bit more time. Like, what is the trend that your body is on? Like, where sometimes it takes a while to know, like, what actually is my baseline. And it's hard to know how much activity you should or shouldn't be doing until you can kind of get, okay, I'm pretty confident this is kind of a steady baseline. And if I do too much, I kind of get to there. And then if I crash, I kind of crash to around there. If I do too much, then it's a bigger crash. But you kind of get a sense of the stable ground that you're working from. And if you don't have stable ground, then you need to probably do a bit less until you do find the stable ground. And then once you've got that, then it becomes easier to work out how much at this stage you can and can't be doing. And I think what can often happen when we talk about doing less activity is people can see that as being quite demoralizing, and kind of what you're saying, that I've already cut my life this much, I'm going to cut my life potentially even more. The thing I always say, though, is that once you get a stable baseline and that's really established, it's up, it's down, it's an odd metaphor. It's kind of downhill but uphill, if that makes sense. Like it's easier, but it's kind of up, like it's progress kind of from.
Right. Yeah.
And so if you've got the baseline and you're improving, progress always feels satisfying and always feels good. Once you can protect and stabilize the progress, then of course there are things that can help that go faster and help that move. But people tend to want to rush to that stage, to skip through this stage and then keep coming back to this stage. And it's a little bit like playing one of those kind of snakes and ladders games, that you go up too fast, you just end up falling down the snake again and then trying to climb the ladder too fast. And if you can just go in a more steady, stable way, then it's a much more effective way of doing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. That's a helpful metaphor. I forgot about that game.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny.
Yeah.
We were down in the English countryside down in Devon a few weeks ago, and they closed one of the main arteries, basically the main road from where we'd been to the little kind of town where we were staying, and we didn't have proper signal on Google Maps, and basically every road we tried to go down, we ended up getting stuck or ending up on a loop back to the same point. And it really reminded me of that experience that I remember on the recovery path. And oh, great, we figured out, we've got the kind of road now. And you kind of go round and round and round. And you go, oh my God, we're back to the starting point of where we were. And so it's taking that time to go a bit more slowly and a bit more steadily, but then to actually be going in a stable right direction.
Yeah.
There's obviously so much more that we could say here, but I'm mindful of the time we've got. Are there any other kind of questions that come from what we've been saying?
I guess just for me, I think the challenge is keeping the discipline when there's so many other factors in play, like, for example, friends wanting me to do more, or feeling not so much social pressure, but the fact that my social contexts were always to do with activity. And so just, the challenge of having that discipline, that even though I know that is the right thing to do, sometimes it's hard when there's either overt or quiet pressure from other people.
Yeah. It is very tricky. And I think the lack of cultural understanding of these kind of conditions only adds to the trickiness of it. And, it's a real challenge to work on your own kind of helper, kind of wanting to be kind of liked and kind of accommodating kind of patterns. But also it's really helpful to do what you can to educate people, send them links to videos, and some will pay no attention, but a few will. And that's a helpful way of helping people understand something that if you're not living it, it's quite difficult to make sense of.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. Well, look, drop me a note in a kind of few weeks or a month or so, when you've kind of, things have kind of settled a bit, what we've been talking about, and perhaps what's come from that and how you're doing with that. There's obviously lots more pieces to this jigsaw, but hopefully that gives you some useful kind of pointers and pieces to kind of go a bit deeper into.
Yeah. No, that's really helpful. Thank you.
Great. My pleasure. Nice to chat, Louise. Have a nice evening.
Cool.
It's getting later there, so I guess I should say sleep well as well.
Thanks. Have a good day.
Thank you. Take care. Bye. I hope you enjoyed that mini session. There's now a bunch of these Therapeutic Tuesdays. So if you found this helpful, please do check out the other mini sessions on either YouTube, Facebook, or the podcast, wherever you watch or listen. Tomorrow's episode is Wellness Wednesday, and next week on Wellness Wednesday, we're going to start the new format. But for this week, I wanted to take a theme that I've touched on in a few places already in the vlog, and I wanted to specifically look at it, which is taking responsibility for our healing path. And I often talk about being captain of the ship of your healing journey. So that's coming up tomorrow on Wellness Wednesday.